This program basically is in response to interest within the congregation to both investigate sort of what sanctuary means within the context of the faith community, and also aspects relating to sponsoring refugee families who are coming into this area. So we have a panel of 4 individuals. Ben Johnson, who's on the end, is the executive director of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. And we have Julia Paley, who's with DMV Sanctuary Congregation Network, and which is basically a loose association, essentially, of a number of congregations in the city. It's formed after the executive orders came down in January. And we have been participating and going to some of the meetings, Rabbi Shankman and myself. And then we have Jill Bussey, Director of Advocacy for the Catholic Legal Immigration Network. And then Ashley Feasley, who is the Director of Policy for the United States Catholic Conference in the Migration and Refugee Services. And the panel discussion is going to focus on sort of 4 major areas, one being the providing sanctuary to, or quote, hosting undocumented persons within a congregation. Participating in rapid response teams, which has become, and we'll get more information about that, which is used in a number of different contexts, but one of which is when the ICE basically shows up at a location. Providing other forms of support to individuals, such as accompaniment and training of Know Your Rights. And lastly, sponsoring refugees and their families upon arrival to the United States. And just keep in mind that at this point, the legal aspects of a lot of this is in flux. Some of these issues are new, but hopefully we'll get some insight into what the issues are and sort of what direction things are going.
Thank you, Kathy. And Kathy and Richard Newman have worked really very, very hard to put together an opportunity for us this evening. I wanted to start and put things in a little bit of a context of why we would do this as Jews. So for that, there's an article that was written by Sean Winter, who's the academic dean at the Australia's Pilgrim Theological College and a professor within the University of Divinity in Australia. He wrote an article in 2008, which was very interesting. Sanctuary for Asylum Seekers is an offer with ancient pedigree. He writes, in several texts of the Hebrew Bible, provision is made for those seeking asylum. There are 2 different traditions. In the book of Exodus, Moses gives the people judgments relating to asylum, in which those who flee to the altar are given some sort of protection. In 1 Kings, we also find individuals seeking asylum at the altar. King David's son hears that Solomon has been crowned king. He fears for his life, and he literally holds on to the horns of the altar until Solomon provides some partial guarantee of his safety. In the book of Joshua, we find an alternative tradition. Here, God instructs Moses' deputy to set apart 6 cities of refuge. These cities were designated to mitigate the law of retribution and blood vengeance. The cities of refuge tradition in the Hebrew Bible disconnects the quest for protection and safety from an ideal of a holy or sacred space. These cities were chosen not because they possessed altars to hang on to, because the protection of the innocent was to be offered within the civil space and the civic space, not in isolation from it. Secondly, the cities were deliberately located within the boundaries of Israel. Legal considerations of refugee cases would take place while they lived within the community. He ends his article in the following way. There is no simple route from this world of the Bible to our own. But if the moral demands enshrined in the Hebrew Bible have anything to say today, They relate not just to what churches or synagogues do with their buildings, but also to the wider question of how a society chooses to treat those who are in the greatest need of its protection. Then finally, a great quote that I saw in the John Marshall Law Review, which I read, of course, every day. The John Marshall, Pamela Bega, I think is her name, writes the following. In Victor Hugo's classic tale, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Quasimodo, the bell ringer, sought sanctuary within the walls of the cathedral. He clearly is a good guy, and we sympathized with him in confrontation with the bad guys. The line between good and evil was clearly drawn. Not so today. The line is not so clear. We hope this night will give us clarity to these lines as we learn from our panel. I'd like him to each to introduce yourselves a little bit. We know who you are and where you work, but tell us a little bit about what it means. Ben, if you'll start.
Sure. So I work for the American Immigration Lawyers Association. The American Immigration Lawyers Association is... you got me now?
Yeah.
All right, there we go. Thank you. So we are 15,000 lawyers all around the country that are involved in the representation of immigrants and businesses and all kinds of different folks that intersect with the U.S. immigration system. And we have also, along the way, had a very profound mission of promoting justice and fairness and due process in the immigration system. So I'm very happy to be involved with the organization, particularly at a time like this. I often say that this is it might be a very difficult time to be an American, but this might be the only time in my lifetime it's kind of been a cool time to be an immigration lawyer. There's a lot of interest in those of us, not just lawyers, but lots of really, really good advocates who stand between immigrants and the sort of misapplication and the injustice that too often happens in the immigration system. So there is some comfort, I think, for those of us who have a long history of being part of this effort for fairness and on behalf of these communities. So I'm very happy to be here. I've been doing this a long time, probably 20 years in Washington, D.C., in one form or another, primarily with legal organizations doing this work. So seen a lot of ups and downs in over the years, and this is an interesting time. This is a very interesting and confusing time, and I think this is a really, really important time particularly for communities of faith to come together and wrestle with who we are as faith communities and finding our voice in these difficult times. So wherever you come down on these issues or whatever process that you need to go through, I think it's important to go through it. And lots of experts here who have been working with faith communities for a long time to help them find a good, solid, safe place. Your voice has never been more important in my estimation as faith communities. We have, I think, lost our moral compass on a lot of immigration issues, and I think the road to finding it comes really through faith communities. So anything that I can do to be helpful, I'm willing to do, but I think you really have three superstars in helping faith communities find their way forward and find their voices and their place in this fight. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Ben. Julia, will you? I think your mic's there. Good. Super.
Hi, so it's really a pleasure to be here. My name is Julia Paley, and I relate as someone who's Jewish. I personally belong to Addis Israel Synagogue, and I think that as many of the people here can relate to, and I went to the refugee Havdalah that was here, many of us as Jews really connect with the feeling of at least our ancestors having been persecuted for their religion and needing to come here. I know mine did in the early 1900s before the crackdown in the 1920s that would have made it illegal or very difficult. And so I feel tremendous gratitude and a real sense of identification and responsibility to stand up for refugees and immigrants and asylum seekers now, as I think that's something that a lot of us are feeling is in common among us. So other aspects of my identity is I'm trained as a cultural anthropologist. I was a professor for 15 years, and I have done a lot of research in Latin America. And as you may know, cultural anthropologists really immerse themselves in the reality of what they're studying and then do participant observation, participate and learn what's going on, and then translate it to others. And in that time, living with popular communities, I was engaged a lot with social movements and human rights struggles. And so that's a very deep part of what's shaped me. And I think that there was just a point when I realized that the social movements and the human rights struggles that were happening here were completely worth paying attention to, and it was possible to be active in those same relationships with Latin Americans and with others as by going to another continent. So that's been really important in shaping me. And finally, what we've been doing most recently, and why I'm here, is that we've created the DMV Sanctuary Congregation Network, which was mentioned before, that you have participants from Washington Hebrew going to. And it's a joint partnership between Sanctuary DMV, which is a group of active people who are supporting safety and people's rights, and PICO National Network, which is a national organizing organization. And they've come together, and I like to tell this little story. When we first envisioned creating a network of religious institutions and faith communities to stand up around immigrants' rights and others, we thought, maybe if we really worked hard, we could get 30 people in the room if we all drew on our connections. And lo and behold, we opened a registration form, and 250 people signed up. In fact, Rabbi Shankman couldn't even come because we had to close down the registration because so many people couldn't even fit in the room. And so what we found is that the community throughout the DC area is just really ready to stand up around these issues, and we already have 65 congregations that have joined, and there are all kinds of trainings and ways of participating that we'll go into later. And my last thing is that I'll just say that we have this flyer here, which will describe a little bit about it and give some web pages and emails that you can immediately get involved.
Super. Thank you so much. Jill?
Thank you. Julia, just so inspired by the work there. So my name is Jill Marie Bussey. I'm the Director of Advocacy at the Catholic Legal Immigration Network. I'm also an ALA member, so I appreciate Ben's leadership. Card carrying for, I believe, over 15 years. Like Ben, I've been in immigration for over 20 years. This is really an unprecedented time. I was in lucrative business immigration law practice for most of my career. A couple of years ago, I decided to change career and get into advocacy and give up serving clients directly and really see how I could serve a network. And that's what Clinic does. We're comprised of a network of over 300 community-based organizations that are all over the United States. They provide immigration legal services to primarily low-income immigrants. And so supporting that network has been such a tremendous gift and lessons every single day in supporting that network. And it's just been, although it's a very challenging time in this country's history, and I'm very concerned about where we're going with policies, it's been just amazingly inspiring to see how the faith community, how these faith-based organizations who serve immigrants, hundreds of thousands of immigrants in a given year, have really come together, and they're actually even overwhelmed with volunteers who want to come help out in the community. So it's just been a pretty inspiring response to a very challenging time. So I appreciate my time with you here tonight, being invited.
Hi, my name is Ashley Feasley, and I'm the Director of Policy at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops and the Migration and Refugee Services Department. When people ask me what I do, I say I work to help resettle refugees. And people say, oh, do you work for the government or do you work for an international organization? And I say, no, I work for the Catholic Church. And so much of refugee resettlement is done by the Catholic Church and other faith-based groups. Matter of fact, 6 of the 9 refugee resettlement organizations are indeed faith-based. We provide the basis for much of the protection, the resettlement, and the continuation of services for refugees in this country. And, I want to say just for a moment, we're talking about protecting immigrants and refugees, but As a model program, the United States is leading the way in refugee resettlement. We are able to use the best in terms of public-private partnership. And it's in large part because of the contribution of faith groups. And I think that it's a really great moment to be here with you to discuss how your community can engage more meaningfully in terms of how to protect immigrants and refugees during this time. So happy to be a part of this conversation, and thank you.
Thank you. I wonder if, Ben, I could call upon you to put this in a little bit of a historical context. This is not the first time that we face this issue where the articles and other things I'm talking about were drawing on the 80s. We saw what was going on with the El Salvador and political asylum and other things in sanctuary. If you could put it into the context and also explain a little bit about the lack of clarity on the law concerning sanctuary, about hosting, if you could put these in context for us.
Sure. I think that's just because I'm the oldest person on the group here that I talk about the
I
history,
wouldn't
right?
count on that.
Fair enough. I'll take that. So yes, you went way back in terms of the biblical concepts of sanctuary and protections that churches and faith communities and temples have provided, for generations and generations on these issues. I think for most of us, the moment where sanctuary, as in the immigration context, has been more resonant in our lives has been in those 70s and 80s when the sanctuary movement was really about churches, once again, churches and houses of worship. Sorry, I'm Catholic, so I come from a language disparity there. There was, opening their doors to folks who were in serious need of protection, and a time when there was a perceived misalignment between reality of our lives and the people that we were living with and around, and what our laws were purporting to require us to do with those folks in our communities. This clash of reality and judicial systems or immigration systems. And so there was a very robust movement to provide literal protection to families, to stop them from being deported or removed from the United States. That, again, harkens back to those very age-old practices of there being a confrontation between moral law and existing sort of human law, as it were, right? The stuff that's on the books that doesn't seem to comport with the values and the realities of the time. So those confrontations have always happened. They happened then. Unfortunately, I think now we're in a kind of a confusing political moment for many, many reasons. And the concept of sanctuary cities, there's a lot of talk about that now. And it has a very different meaning than that. Most of what we're reading about in the papers about sanctuary cities and sanctuary movements really has a much broader concept of what we mean by sanctuary. For the most part, up until perhaps very recently, most of the sanctuary cities that people were talking about were not cities that were willing to stand between immigrants and a deportation officer. They were really just saying, look, if the law requires those folks to be deported, then fine. But as local law enforcement or as city officials, we're saying that's not our job, right? We're not going to stand between you and your job, but we're not going to be part of that. You need to do what you need to do, and I need to do what I need to do. And for the most part, those sanctuary cities were saying that, look, we believe that it's important for us to build trust and relationships with those communities. And the way that we do that in this environment is not to spend our time finding out who's got what immigration status. We're not going to ask about immigration status. We're going to be focused on who are real threats to our communities or who are violating local laws. So a lot of the sanctuary conversation now is about a lack of cooperation with immigration law enforcement, and not necessarily an aggressive in circling the wagons around folks that are the subject of deportation. Increasingly, though, as the current deportation machinery has been ramped up, as we see for the first time in probably the 8 years, a really visible, visceral commitment to going after those folks, that may be changing. There are more and more folks that are willing to be to take a more of a resistance posture with regard to this and say, we're not only just going to stand to the side and say we're not going to cooperate, we might actually be considering standing between these deportation forces and these families that they're going after. Even with that, though, and I'll end here, there are lots of different ways to stand between or to stand up for those folks that may be the subject of deportation. So it's just, there's no easy way, and I think, again, you're with three really amazing experts on all of the different ways that faith communities can be part of a sanctuary movement in a comfortable way that works for what it is that your congregation is attempting to achieve and the way that you want to be impactful in your community. So we should just try to disentangle ourselves from what history has told us about sanctuary, and we should embrace what we can do now under the current.
Can I ask you to clarify, what's the law situation? Is the law clear on hosting?
So the law is not clear, and I think I was asked to provide some legal analysis of what exposure faith communities might have if they decided to take aggressive postures and maybe provide sanctuary, allow a family to live, literally within the sanctuary of your house of worship. And say, and perhaps be very confrontational about saying, if you want them, I dare you to come get them, right? Even that most extreme type of protection, or all of the different variations on that. And my answer now is even more profound in the wake of what happened to the FBI Director Comey, which is that I don't know what's possible anymore, right? I think it's really important for faith communities to understand that there are varying levels of risks in terms of your engagement on this issue, but I don't think there's a zero risk option here. Putting yourselves out there and challenging the current way that the system works is not a risk-free proposition. Standing up against what's happening now has never been a risk-free proposition, and I think that's a challenge for faith communities. You have to find your level of comfort. But there are certainly very low risk options available. Opening your space to allow experts to come in and provide families information, just to hold seminars. That's a very, very low risk kind of a thing, and it's really, really high need. So I'll end with this in terms of talking about need. When we do local community events to talk to families and people about what's happening, I just want to put a fine point on what it is that we're preparing people to do. We really are talking to mothers and fathers about how to prepare custody arrangements. What happens if you get picked up and taken away from your children? Who's going to watch your children? What's going to happen to the house that you managed to buy for the first time in your life? What rights might you have in the immigration system once you enter into it? These are very, very difficult, but also just sort of personally earth-shattering things to have to wrestle with. And that level of engagement matters. Helping people understand, what am I going to do with my kids? What am I going to do with my house? What happens if this happens to me? Helping them work through that is transformative, I think, for the communities that decide to do it, and it is profoundly impactful for the people that you'll be helping.
Jill, would you like to add anything to this?
No, I think Ben's really covered it on this topic. Thanks, Ben.
Is there a difference between supporting a refugee and asylum seeker versus providing sanctuary versus other aspects of supportiveness?
Yeah, as I said, and again, I encourage others to jump in here because they've been working with faith communities about the whole host of options. So yes, there's a role for, and I think there's a value to literally deciding, I'm going to help this family. We're going to focus our attention on protecting this particular family. It can have a profound impact on the larger narrative. There can be media moments about it. It can have a broad spillover effect in terms of changing how we think about how this community engages and sending signals to communities. Those are higher risk moments of resistance. And again, they have their role. I'm not going to try to disparage that. But I also think there is a really, really important role to impacting a lot more people to providing information and assistance. Being willing, instead of providing sanctuary to one family, finding people in your community that are willing to go with those families to their interviews with immigration offices. Just to literally sit with them and have them know that somebody is here to help them and that shares their pain and their confusion.
So I think, Ben's highlighting a really important point, which is you're here looking for your kind of, we call it discernment in the Catholic faith, kind of a moment of what's going to happen for you as a community of faith in terms of how you're going to help immigrants and refugees. And to Ben's point, there is really a spectrum of options for you. In terms of what you could be doing. So on one element, we have, the idea of hosting. So actually giving, physical accommodation to, in this case, it would be an asylum seeker because refugees are here in a legal status. So these are individuals who would be undocumented, who maybe are facing deportation. And that's one spectrum. That's one end. Kind of when we're talking about the risk, that's the higher risk issue. And one of the things that would be really important when you're thinking about that is that the fact that the law is murky, but there are some laws on the books right now. One particular is relating to Section 274 of the INA that deals with harboring. Now, do we know how this administration is going to implement this law? We don't. And I would be, and everybody here I think would be doing you a disservice if we said we could predict, with our new Attorney General that this person is going to prosecute you or not prosecute you. But that's one spectrum. But swinging to the other spectrum, there are a whole host, and I think we're all going to kind of talk about a whole host of other options that people can do to support immigrants and refugees that are equally powerful and maybe a little bit less on the risk factor as it relates to laws on the books. And I think that there's going to be a little bit of a conversation about some of the things like know your rights and accompaniment. But I think it's really important when we think about, what the options are is what is you as a community would be comfortable with? What do you think would give maximum impact, I think, to individuals that you're looking to assist? And really the sustainability, because we are in this for hopefully 4, but possibly 8 years. And we really need the support and the continued commitment to help people here, to help people in need at this time. And so I'm going to turn it over. I think there can be a little bit of discussion about some of the other options.
So we'll just go on to, so Julia or Jill, would Julia tell us a little bit about what rapid response is? Or Julia,
sure.
either however you guys want to do it.
If we could back up just a little bit to buttress what Ashley said, I brought some materials that I thought would be helpful that describe sort of the discernment process, and you didn't know you were coming here for a test. But I brought a little quick quiz for you that was out on the table. There's plenty out there to gauge how welcoming your faith community currently is. And I brought those 2 tools to help people think through and consider. We're only going to talk about a couple of the issues tonight, or a couple of the options tonight, but to think through many of the ways that a faith community can be a welcoming and supportive place for immigrants. So I encourage you to take the test and see where your faith community, let's see, hopefully you're all in the good here if you're already hosting. You might already be in excellent if you're already sponsoring or supporting a refugee family. And then the discernment piece outlines, it has this quiz at the end, it outlines some of the things that you can do, like offering space. Ben mentioned there's so many undocumented individuals and mixed status families in the DC region. Just providing space so that a workshop can be held here so that those individuals can learn about their rights, learn about planning for family contingency, for learning about potential screening for other forms of relief. So many people are undocumented, but they don't even know that they could either be a U.S. citizen by derivation or eligible for some other form of relief that could help them in a situation. So I encourage you to look at that. I'm happy to talk to anybody.
And you also have the Catholic Church has come up with a full guide for discernment, I believe I saw online.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
Which you'll talk about now.
sorry, yes.
Okay.
So there's a series of materials relating to discernment and also materials relating to suggestions in lieu of sanctuary clinic, and then I also have a backgrounder that kind of gives suggestions. But the idea here is that we have been working to try and encourage Catholics to think about what they are comfortable to commit to in terms of welcoming the stranger and part of our tradition and assisting immigrants and refugees.
Super. So I know that Jill and Julia, you've been involved in rapid response. Can one of you tell us a little bit about what rapid response is, what their function of the teams?
Right. So when we talk about rapid response, I just want to make sure that we all understand what it involves. And rapid response is typically in response to an enforcement action. So if you think about immigration customs enforcement officers out in a community, at a workplace, wherever it may be, who's targeted an individual for apprehension. So at that point, an individual would call in their rapid response team, which Julia can talk about how those teams get formed and trained to accompany the individual during that particularly very scary moment. And in some cases, some groups take it even further in terms of intervening with those actions. I have no judgment on any of that. Of course, there's high and low risk, as we were talking. So I think Julia wanted to talk a little bit about how rapid response teams form, who they're comprised of, and more importantly, I think how they're trained to do the great work that they're doing.
Super.
Yeah, so we're actually pretty excited about this. Everybody is waiting for it to launch. I'm getting all these questions. When's it going to be ready? When's it going to be ready? So I think we're about 3 or 4 weeks away from this happening. But essentially what's been happening with the incredible leadership of Ben Beachy, who's been part of the effort, the Sanctuary DMV and the Sanctuary Congregation Network, using a system that PICO National Network developed in California. But the DC metro area is going to be one of the first to launch in the country. And this system is going to have one phone number that anyone in the whole DC metro area can call. For example, if ICE, the immigration enforcement people, show up at their house. So let's say that someone's, they're living in a house and the ICE officers come. Now, hopefully they have gone to Know Your Rights workshops right here in this room and know not to open the door and a whole set of other things they shouldn't do, but they have this phone number, and so they call it. So what's going to happen is there will be a dispatcher who is always on duty. And so one of the things we're looking for, and this is a commitment, is people who want to become a dispatcher. And I forget, you have to be on for something like 12 hours in a row once or twice a month or something. And the dispatcher is going to calm them down and stay on the phone and be a human connection for them, and is going to remind them of their rights and what to do and not to do, and is also going to ascertain that this is legitimate. This isn't just a rumor. This is actually happening. There's a raid, right? And then at that point, there's going to be a computer system where the dispatcher can put the address into the computer and find out within a mile how many trained rapid responders are there. And if there aren't enough, I don't know what that would be, like 40 people or something, within a 1 mile radius, well, within a 3 mile radius, how many are there? And so all of this, of course, and this is another way you can participate, is you can get trained to be a rapid responder, which means that if there's an ICE action close by you, and I guess it could be where you work or where you live, at that, you would get a text. So the dispatcher will send a text to the trained people nearby, and they will all come as quickly as possible. So you're going to have maybe dozens of people who are showing up, and they will be trained about what they should and shouldn't do and what their rights are. It's about a 2-hour training, and there's a whole manual, and there's a set of lawyers who will explain the legal issues when you go to the training. But then they'll show up, and they're going to film the activity of the officers, and they're also going to respond to the needs of the family afterward. In other words, are there children who need help? Does this family need a lawyer? Do they need groceries? What's going on, and how can there be kind of a longer-term connection? So that is an absolute opportunity for you all, and we have, well, you can get in touch with us, and we will link you up to how you can register for a training. It would be really great if this congregation could send a few people to train the trainer and then do a training for the congregation here.
And so let's peel this back a little bit in terms of, so what's involved in some of this training, and what are the activities that they're actually doing? You mentioned about filming, and what are the legal consequences? Are we allowed? There are issues about whether police officers can be filmed, their privacy. I know that that's an issue out there. If you can just
Jill,
jump
do you want to address that?
Either of these. And first, what's the why film? Why rapid response? What's the function of that rapid response? What does it provide for the immigrant besides comforting them? And what are we finding from?
What I probably should have said at the beginning, the environment that we're in right now. ICE officers, immigration enforcement, are completely emboldened by the climate where we are, and extremely decentralized at this point. So there are a lot of officers, unfortunately, there are obviously professionals out there, but there are some officers who employ tactics that are questionable, and in some cases not consistent with ICE policy. And so when we talk about being there to witness an enforcement action, being present and serving as a witness, the training would hopefully help individuals to understand if something's going wrong in this particular action. The filming, so you wouldn't know all of that, right? You wouldn't know if something's going wrong. But the filming or photographing of an incident of that helps serve as a record if there is, and I feel like you want to say something, if there is something going inappropriate or unprofessional in the particular action. It also serves as powerful documentation of what is the fallout? What does this look like for communities when you have a mother who has just been taken and her 3 children are left there, wondering who's going to take care of them? So I think it's deeply important work, and I think
does it also function as an impediment in any way, or change the behavior, or put it into the public forum?
One would hope that.
So that's one of the goals of
that being present would help remind ICE officers that they're being watched, and
accountability,
and that there is accountability for their actions. And one would hope that with witness, that the incidents of misconduct would lessen, but that is obviously not guaranteed by that presence.
But I would put this in the category of the lower risk endeavors for a community, because you can't impede the arrest or the process, but you certainly can record it, and it does have a profound impact. Maybe people have heard of the fact that ICE agents recently have been going into courthouses to try to engage folks, while they're showing up to, for their court appearances, whether it's domestic court appearances or other kinds of court appearances. Well, recently there was a video of, what ultimately ended up being a takedown in the courtroom, with these 2 officers grabbing somebody, wrestling them to the ground. And those are the kinds of things that are going to make ICE officers more uncomfortable, and they're going to make the judges in those courtrooms more engaged in saying, hey, don't don't do that here. That doesn't make any sense. We want people to show up for their court appearances, and if you're wrestling people to the ground in the lobby of my courtroom, that's not going to help with people showing up and feeling like this is a civic obligation that they can and should make. So again, I think it can be very impactful. I also feel like, I'm glad that you talked about the underpinnings of this. I mean, I do think it's important for communities to get educated about what we're talking about. 80% of people in immigration detention facilities don't get a lawyer. And they go through a process that's incredibly confusing, incredibly difficult, often moves very fast without any lawyer. The head of the National Association of Immigration Judges has said that immigration court is like death penalty cases being handled by a traffic court. They're under-resourced, they are understaffed, there aren't due process protections in place, and the consequences are profound for many, many of the people that are going through here. Lots of everyday things that I think are aha moments for people. We've heard of Miranda rights, right? You got to be advised, you have the right to remain silent, and all those kinds of things. So those warnings are available in immigration system, but guess what? In immigration system, they're allowed to give those warnings after the interrogation, not before the interrogation. All to say that on the best day, even with the professional officers that are following the rules, the system is set up to result in deportation as quickly as possible with as minimal interruption, very little federal court review. If we don't, as community members, get engaged, then I promise you the system is going to continue to put out unfair results. So most people just don't know what's happening in the immigration system, and it's important that we get informed about what happens in the immigration system, the lack of due process. And the last thing I'll say to build on that is that what's happening in the immigration right now is because these are nameless, faceless immigrants, right? And I think if the Dreamer movement has taught us anything, is that when those kids stood up wearing their caps and gowns and said, this is what undocumented people look like, it shook everything up. Putting names and faces and people to this bland, meaningless thing of immigration enforcement is not what we're talking about. We're talking about real people, real lives, real situations, real communities. 70% of the undocumented population have been here for 10 years or longer. They got deep roots in communities all over the country, and it's time that we start making those kinds of stories real.
And I think the intersection about that namelessness and how we can turn that around, a large piece of that comes from faith communities, right? So these are individuals who maybe you know it from your congregation or in your places of worship, or maybe you don't know them, but you have a connection with this issue because of your faith, because of the tradition of where you come from. And we are very unique and very important messengers when it comes to putting a face and putting kind of context to some of the human misery that is occurring here. And I think, as you kind of examine what you want to do, I just hope that you come out of here wanting to do something and doing it as, through your congregation and through your faith tradition, because I think it's a very powerful thing that we're trying to orient from that perspective.
Go ahead, Julia.
Yeah, I want to underscore some of what was said, maybe just a slightly different approach. I mean, I think that we're offering today options. So some of them are know your rights, rapid response, accompaniment, but I think what's ultimately important is that there be an effect on the total system that's detaining and deporting people. And so each of these things has an immediate benefit to the immigrant who's going through them, but they also have a way in which they're affecting it in general. So this idea that ICE knows it's being watched and filmed and and those videos will circulate widely means that it has, potentially has to think harder about what it's going to do because it knows that there'll be scrutiny. I also think that we just live in such a segregated society. I don't know about you all, but I am aware of that all the time. And there are so many people who are not affected by detentions and deportations and humiliation and racism. And to personally show up to be one of 40 people who's trained and who shows up at the house of someone and has a personal experience and connection of what this kind of injustice entails, I think is very transformative and is just really important. And I think that overall, with enough just people in the country going through those experiences, there has to be a change in the narrative, a sense that we're not going to let this go on as people of faith, as people who see that this isn't some, alien. This is a kid in my kid's school. This is a neighbor, because by definition, they just live a mile from my house. This is somebody who's in my community, and that shifts the whole sense of whether this is acceptable, whether we're going to put up with it, and whether we're going to live in ignorance or really be engaged.
It also puts on a different value in midot for Judaism, al ta'amod dam re'echa, that we're not allowed to stand idly by when the term of spilling one's blood is not necessarily physical spilling of blood. It's the endangerment of an individual, and we have an obligation. So I know we've talked about these issues in a sense. What are some of the legal ramifications? You said there were low risk on some of these things, and this is part of this, the training. There are different aspects of this, but and we've also talked about these filmers and whatever, and you said this is a very sort of low risk, activity in terms of this. So, and these are, why, Julia, has DC been picked? Is it a political move to pick DC to actualize this as one of the first cities to put this into action? Or is it because we have the greater need, our numbers of immigrants?
Oh, no. We're just fabulous. I mean, I don't know how to put this. No.
Why should I think otherwise?
I mean, there are rapid response efforts happening all over the country, but and so many of these things are decentralized. So we're cooperating with PICO National Network, which works in 20 different states, none of which is here. But we've kind of convinced them, let's get going on this particular issue. And so they're partnering here. And so PICO developed this system in California. I mean, they pioneered this incredible thing. And so I think all the federations throughout the country probably are going to start doing this. But the team in D.C. has been so on the ball. I mean, Ben Beachy, he basically...
Ben is with PICO, right?
He's with Sanctuary DMV, which is part of this partnership. And he put in amazing effort into putting together a guidebook, a training. It's unbelievable. This is all volunteer work. He works full-time at the Sierra Club, and then evenings and weekends he's been creating this unbelievable training and getting all these other people involved. And one of the major pieces of work he did was to meet with every major immigrant rights organization, each of which was going to have their own hotline, but many of which, didn't really have the staffing. There wasn't really anyone there to answer it. It was kind of touch and go, and convince them all to cooperate in this one effort so there's one hotline. So basically, he and a whole team of people are just doing a great job, and we're still waiting for it to launch, but I think it's going to be spectacular.
And I would venture to say that this is no doubt going to be a great success because of the resources here in the DC metro area. And that's one of the things to think about as you're discerning, as you're thinking through what you as a faith community can and will do, and you as an individual, is what resources, what skill sets can you bring to supporting their immigrant and refugee community. I think that we have a tremendous amount of resources in the DMV area. We also have a lot of undocumented people who are living here who need help, right? So this is a great place to pilot that out in a great number of coalitions and faith communities that are willing to step up. Imagine if you lived in Southeast Georgia. Imagine if you lived in another rural area and you didn't have all these tremendous resources.
Well, and there also is a little bit this nomenclature that's been out there calling places sanctuary city. A number of the clerics, Cardinal Wuerl, others, this nomenclature sometimes is misunderstood by the population, thinking that there's something different about the city. So it puts an obligation on the city to provide certain things. And if somebody is moving from a place where they may not be noticed in Georgia to a place they think is a sanctuary city, they're actually putting themselves at greater risk in some respects, because the opportunity is there. Would you segue into perhaps a little bit about what Know Your Rights is all about?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the lower risk, as I said, options that faith communities can offer. As I mentioned at the beginning, we serve a network of 300 community-based organizations that provide immigration legal services to the low-income community. Those organizations sometimes have 2 people in the office. Sometimes they have 20 people in their office. They cannot serve all of the individuals who come to them on an individual basis. Providing counseling on knowing your rights to one single person at a time, we'd just never be able to meet the need in the community. And so hosting a workshop and being able to disseminate that information and provide that education is a great way of tapping into the resources of the community, and strategically placing a workshop of that nature in a house of worship is quite smart for legal reasons, because houses of worship are considered right now to be sensitive locations where immigration enforcement should not be engaging in enforcement actions. So it's a smart use of resources, and it really can bring a community together.
So what are the things that they're teaching? What are the rights that they're...
I'm glad that you asked that. I brought Know Your Rights presentation so that you yourself can see. The photograph or the cover page looks like this. If you want to flip through them, there's plenty of them out in the lobby. So Know Your Rights covers a lot of things. For this particular guide and this particular workshop that we're talking about knowing your rights when you are in an enforcement situation. Know your rights, just like sanctuary, can mean many things in many contexts, but for this particular training or guide, we go over what Julia talked about a little bit about what happens if ICE comes and knocks on your door. Knowing that you don't have to open the door unless there's a warrant, knowing that you have the right to ask for the officer to identify themselves and show the warrant. And we even have examples of what a warrant looks like and how it should be executed, right? So that's really important, right? The guide also walks through what should you do if you're at your workplace and the ICE officers come to your workplace, knowing that you have the right to remain silent, that you have the right to an attorney, and it has a cutout card that people can take with them and put it in their wallet so they don't have to carry this around with them every single day. And it also talks about that really important thing that Benjamin was talking about earlier, which is preparing yourself for the very worst case scenario where you are taken into custody and your children are at school. Who's going to pick your kids up from school? Who has the right to pick up your kids from school? If you're in detention, and I'm sorry I get a little emotional about this because I was recently involved in a case where this happened to a woman, she was deported, and her children were at home and they took her, and no one was home with her children. And they left her children alone and very afraid. That family had a little bit of a plan, and they had family members who immediately were with the children. But what if you didn't know to have that plan? This mother was working full-time, and she was a primary income earner for her family. How was her husband to get access to her last paycheck? If they hadn't made this plan, knowing how to hold their assets and their financial assets and their possessions, that takes planning, and it's quite laborious, to tell you the truth. And so we need volunteers with that skill set and the ability to take time and walk through that with people. It's a process, and it's as a faith community, sometimes we are used to comforting those in our community, and that draws upon, and using our faith to do so, and I think that draws upon a skill set.
I think this is fabulous, but I'd like to ask Ashley. I know that the Catholic Church has prepared a lot of materials and other things on this, and if one of you could just talk about this. So, the church is a little bit different necessarily than the synagogue, and I know that there are certain parishes and places where there are a tremendous amount of people. Washington is a very rich environment for the community of those who might be at risk, and I know that there's great activities that are happening. But so walk us through a Washington Hebrew, an Addis Israel, a Trinity Church, whatever. If they want to do something like this, how does this? If they want to provide this, and how does the Catholic Church, or how do people get the information out?
Sure. So you're exactly right. For at least speaking about the Catholic Church, we have dioceses that are very active, that have great leadership on this issue, whether it's from a bishop, an archbishop, cardinal, women, men, religious. And we have other dioceses that are not, or they're in areas that are under-resourced with large immigrant populations. So one of the things that we have done is, obviously we share Clinics Know Your Rights, but the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops created 6 videos. They're in English and Spanish, and they're no longer than 3 minutes. And they're branded with our official Catholic Bishops logo. And these are tools for bishops and dioceses to disseminate, to say, let's start this conversation. Let's send out these informations. We've had, there's over 170 dioceses that we work with, and we've had a really positive response. A majority of them have put these Know Your Rights on the website. What does it do? In a lot of ways, I think it's a first step for a religious leader to kind of signal that they are open to doing this type of work. And then from there, we work with our Catholic Charities Network and our other immigration advocates to start to set up Know Your Rights in places like churches and with immigration service providers. Similar for you would be HIAS. HIAS is a great resource. They do similar work in terms of they have immigration and resettlement services, and will know the networks of, Jewish service providers throughout the states. But from there, it is really, I think, a question of engagement. All right? It's a question of, if you have a bishop that is supportive of this, then you're going to get a little bit further along. One of the things that we urge, we have a script that we can share, but it's helping individuals, parishioners, who want to be more active, and more importantly, they want their diocese to be more active. So it's basically a script of engaging your local parish priest and engaging your bishop, saying, this is a priority to me as a Catholic. So for you, it would be the Jewish faith. I want to be more involved in this issue, and I want us as a community to be more involved. But I think that explaining the importance of this is a first step, because not every religious leader will understand how important this is to the community. You have many other, I think, concerns and points of care in your community. So beginning that dialogue as a concerned member of the community and saying, I want to promote some of these materials. For us, again, we put them on the website and the church bulletin and get that dialogue going, I think is a really important first step.
Thank you very much. Julia.
Well, I want to add on to that from a Jewish...
Microphone.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. You can be heard, but you won't be heard over the stream.
Okay. So I just wanted to add on to that from the perspective of the Jewish community as well. There are a whole lot of resources that are being developed among Jewish groups. So one of them is the RAC, and I know that Rabbi Lustig at the end is going to read from the Reform Movement's statement, which came out really recently. There was a resolution about sanctuary issues, and I know that I just spoke at their consultation on conscience,
yes.
I think a week ago.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really incredible. And then Teruah as well, which mainly involves rabbis around human rights issues, is also developing a resource around sanctuary issues. So there's strong support that's Jewish specific. And in addition to that, in our network, we have 2 large Reformed synagogues, which are Temple Sinai in D.C. and Temple Rodef Shalom in Falls Church, Virginia. And we also have some small congregations, including Kol Ami and Shirat HaNefesh, which don't have their own buildings, but they're Jewish communities who pray together. And we're hoping that many other ones will be engaged. And so I encourage all of you to be in relationship with the synagogues who have already joined the network. And actually, both of them have incredible statements that they use to write to their boards to get approval. They're very interesting. They draw on Jewish sources. And also to just be in touch with the other synagogues in the area and be in dialogue as all of us move forward together and look for these resources.
But I also think that what I'm hearing from this as well, and having looked at some of the Catholic Church's material, what I find is so nice is that it is not only giving an opportunity to be institutionally involved, it's allowing the individual. So there are lots of different ways. Even if your synagogue or your parish or whatever is not involved, that doesn't mean you can't go to join in as a rapid response person. Doesn't mean that you can't volunteer to give legal services to someone. It doesn't matter. There are a tremendous amount of opportunities here. And with each of those opportunities, there also seems to be a tremendous amount of ambiguity as to what the consequences could or might be on some of the elements of this. We haven't gone into it about personally allowing somebody asylum or to seek sanctuary in a private home, which is questions that have been asked and other things of this nature. And I think all of these will be ferreted out. Before we get too late, I want to ask a little bit about what accompaniment has been and how that, what that really entails and what it means.
So you're going to start and then I'm going to continue.
Okay.
Super, thank you.
I do what I'm told. So I wanted to give you a sense of what accompaniment is. And it, again, just like sanctuary, just like things, it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. When we're using this term, when I'm using the term accompaniment, we're talking about an individual, could be anybody, who agrees to accompany an individual, an immigrant, to a particular appointment. In most cases, we're talking about an ICE check-in. So again, this is pretty specific, but accompaniment could be otherwise, right? So sometimes...
What is an ICE check-in?
And I will get to that definitely.
Good.
I'll get to some other ways of accompanying, which could be you might live in a jurisdiction where it's a little unfriendly. Right here in the DC metro area, although DC is a sanctuary, just down the road you have what's called a 287G environment, right? So that's a jurisdiction that has, unlike what Ben was saying, or different from what Ben was saying, sanctuaries jurisdictions say, I don't want to be involved in the immigration law enforcement. We want to stick to protecting our own community and creating trust with our community. A 287G environment would be a jurisdiction that says, no, we want to help you out, ICE, and we want to deputize our local law enforcement to take on what you do and help you with your deportation and enforcement actions. So they're right here in this DC metro area, and those inhospitable environments, it can be really quite unnerving just to take your child to school every day. And so accompaniment sometimes takes the form of, I'll go with you to the school bus stop with your kid. So another form of accompaniment could be more technical, where an individual who is in an agreement with Immigration and Customs Enforcement to come on a regular basis to prove that they're still here and they're still complying with the reason why they're here in the United States. There's a lot of legal terms to that, but essentially they check in to prove that they're still complying with what the government has asked them to do. And in those cases, some individuals have actually recently been taken into custody, even though the government has said we won't deport you, right? So it creates a lot of fear and anxiety in the community when people are going to these regular check-ins. And so accompaniment in that situation would look like, I'll go with you, I'll drive you to that appointment, I'll stay with you in the lobby until they call you back. For many times we've had members of the clergy who attend appointments, but this could be any person from the faith community. And it really has to do a lot with providing for the emotional needs of the individual, as well as, again, if at that point the individual is taken into custody, that the person who is accompanying them says, okay, I know what to do. I'll call their lawyer, I'll call their family, I'll let them know that this has happened. So it's an important way of capturing and disseminating information. Does
Thank
that
you.
cover what you wanted me to cover, Viva?
Sure. So we're doing trainings. Anyone who wants to do accompaniment, we can train you. It's also been pretty impressive. There's like a 2-hour training and a handbook, and people from Sanctuary DMV have been very involved with this. In addition to these kind of individual accompaniments, we've also been building vigils in which there are particular cases that for a variety of different reasons, it seems like it's really worth making a much bigger deal about this. It may benefit the person. That person may just really need a lot of community support for this, hopefully, to go well at their check-in. It may be a case that should hit the national media and be one that everybody's talking about and everybody's aware of. It may be, so there are a whole set of different reasons. It may be because we're supporting local immigrant rights groups and they're putting out a request and we're being responsive around this. But what we've been doing is holding a vigil at the ICE check-in. And what this means is that there's a strong participation of clergy, and a number of rabbis in this area have been very involved in these. We've done 2 so far in Baltimore, and I would love everyone here to be involved. We're about to do 2 more in Fairfax, in Virginia, where the ICE office is, on May 18th and May 30th. And with these, we have a press conference. There's lots of media there. Clergy do prayers. We have singing. We make a whole set of statements that show the injustice of this and hold signs. And the lawyer and a few clergy accompany the person into the ICE check-in and are trying to hopefully have an impact on there being a better outcome, I guess. And then hopefully that person will be able to come back and reunite with their family, and then there's more kind of gathering around them and documenting this in the media and hopefully a celebration, but with the sense that there were so many people who were also in there who might have been detained and deported, and so many people every day. But
And
kind of changing the narrative.
I just want to echo to Julia is that, I mean, I think that what has been surprising to many of us who've been involved in activism, if you think about the night that the executive order came in, around the country, David was in Houston. I mean, I was on a plane to, you know, it's amazing that spontaneously people came out to the airports, you know, in this sense. We also have known that there have been, you know, there have been other situations in terms of when we prepared for, which was Rabbi Schenkman got a call and we were asked to host, and we said, sure, we'll host, and we had the chapel already for the Havdalah, and then we were running around because within a matter of moments, the 300 seats were filled in here.
Right.
And so I think there has been unprecedented response, and we were, you know, we filled a large section of a very large sanctuary, and that's amazing on a Saturday night with really very little notice. So I think that there is a history in terms of this. I want to move us, if we can, to one of the last things that we talked about, you know, I'd like to hear a little bit about sponsoring refugees. And Ashley, you talked about this, and I know that there's, you know, you'd mentioned that one of the 9 agencies, there's HIAS, there's the Lutheran tell us a little bit about what that is and what's involved, because that's a different aspect than sanctuary, but I think it's really important.
Right. So we have 9 agencies, as I said, 6 of them are faith-based, who do and handle the refugee resettlement actual programs here in the United States. And these agencies operate in all of the 50 states. All 50 states. And what happens is they work to actually assist the people once they get here, families or individuals who are looking to reunite with families, and help them get settled. So under the way the government runs the program, there's about a 90-day period of benefits that refugees who have been certified as a refugee, vetted, and allowed to come over are eligible to receive. But if you can imagine being somebody who is a certified victim of torture, who is coming from someplace like Syria, who has been waiting in a camp or in an urban setting for 3-4 years, coming to the United States with your family, you speak no English, trying to stand up on your feet within 90 days seems kind of unrealistic. So this is where community activism and kind of engagement comes in. Many of our Catholic charities and many parishes have taken on what I would call a sponsorship of refugees. Now, we are not like Canada, so we do not have a private model where an individual takes responsibility for another refugee person who's here and then is to oversee kind of their integration into our society. We still run the refugee resettlement program through the federal government in partnership with the 9 agencies. But as I pointed out in the case of my Syrian family that's coming here, those 90 days come really fast, and at the end, we still need quite a bit of assistance helping to integrate that family and making sure that they're able to live here, in a way that is, I think, productive and also supportive of why they're here in the first place, which is to be free of persecution. What does that look like? So a lot of times we have individuals who offer to help assist people enroll their children into school. That's a really big thing. And we can talk about that with undocumented children too, not just refugee children, but immigrant children. Imagine being a parent and trying to navigate the school system and not speaking the language and not being accustomed with the, kind of needs for doing that. I will tell you, my mom is a newly retired public school teacher, and this is my mom's new thing. She is so inspired, I think, to engage and help some of the Central American kids who are in my community enroll into school. And she, has commented about how fulfilling this is. Is this something that we could describe as an option to be welcoming into, I think, a company? Absolutely. Do people need help with this service? Yes. So it's an example. Another example I would say is also assisting with basic literacy and job skills training. Again, the language is a huge barrier. And we also have, programs set up, Highest does as well, for cultural orientation and engagement on that as well. So I think that there are a variety of options if you're thinking about sponsoring a refugee family, assisting a refugee family. I know the International Rescue Committee works here in Washington, D.C. They have an office in Silver Spring, and Highest also has an office in Silver Spring, and we are located in Catholic Charities of Washington, D.C. And I'll follow up with some emails, but always in need of help, I think, particularly during this time, because this is a very much an immigration-focused issue, but refugees are really facing the greatest challenge, our program, that we've ever seen. And so it's a really vital moment to also provide support for refugees.
Thank you very much. I want to draw us to give us a little bit of a chance to open it up for specific questions. I think we're a small enough group and an intimate enough group that we won't go to the cards. But I want to first thank you all for doing this, for your advocacy, for your expertise. I think what is very, very clear is that this is a complex issue, but it's also an issue that can be taken in small bites and is very doable. And whether people want to get involved as on a congregational level, there is a tremendous spectrum of way that people can fulfill their civic, moral responsibility of helping others. I think what is so powerful in terms of is when we begin to recognize, and I've heard stories now about people talking about, my son was in school and one of his friends who's on the soccer team, their face, and the mother came up to me and asked me, would I be part of her plan to take care of her children? So we don't, this is not something that's, this isn't happening in sections of town that we don't know. This is also happening to people who are established and who are here, and all sorts of things happen in terms of this. And there are a lot of people that come to this country and who've made it in and who don't realize that they're in jeopardy because their legal rights weren't followed through. We worked for years helping with IUTA, which is an organization. We used to paint their building on Mitzvah Day and do things and all these things. And so I think it's very important. Our teams, we've already had our Minds Matter teams have helped in these issues as a temple as well, with helping people with understanding their legal rights. So there's opportunities as lawyers, there's opportunities as individuals. There are people here who I had one person who told me that she got one of her friends because her friend can cut through any red tape. So they sent her with a group of people to help register children. And what nobody else could get done, she got done. So there is an opportunity here. I'd like to open it up for questions, but I want to just make sure to let you know we thank you for your commitment, for your knowledge, and really for sharing with us this evening your expertise. And they all have made themselves available so that when we get deeper questions, what I think Ashley can provide us, I know the Catholic Church has a beautiful guide about discernment, about what the process that one goes through. I know that each of these 9 agencies have very simple and clear things about what it entails and what the obligations, both financial and physically, of doing this. Washington Heaver has toyed with the idea, if we can do rapid response to Katrina and prepare pallets that are being taken up for people who are in need, why can't we prepare a pallet that can be delivered to a church that's going to house somebody that's got 2 weeks of everything on a pallet? So we're all exploring creative ideas, and a lot of that is coming from the fact that the Jewish community has really come together, and the Catholic communities, the faith community, and we really appreciate it. Let's open it up for questions. Marcia.
Thank you so much for being here. It was a wonderful evening.
Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you. I'd love us, though, and this is a more just in terms of Washington Hebrew, but we are a group of, 10,000 people. I would love for us to be able to talk a little bit at some point about really adopting.
That's already in process, and I think that's great, and I think you'll be very happy. As you read in the last journal, we mentioned about the fact that we've moved from advocacy to action. We're very pleased that several of our funds have already stepped up, and individuals and things. So there's no financial obligation. That we're ready. We're ready and in the process, and you'll see in a few months that we're laying this out. So anybody who wants to be involved, start rallying all those people on those levels. So I think that's a great question, and we can deal with that inside. Other questions that for the panel? Or yes, Joan.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about what is involved if we were to try and hold workshops that would be giving this information out. Do we hold them? Are we the people who are giving the workshops, or are we organizing them and getting people to come and speak? Or how does that work?
Well, that's a great question. And for those who are live streaming, the question is, what does it take to host a workshop?
Thank you for thinking of that.
Yeah, sure. And so what we recommend is that you work with a legal services provider, right? So Ashley mentioned Catholic Charities DC. There's many in the area that have the expertise and, frankly, the outreach to the community to bring individuals in. And normally what the faith community would do is serve as the host and provide the space and help organize the logistics. Workshops sometimes you want different rooms, different spaces. People many times bring their children to workshops, so providing some childcare and things for children to do while their parents are learning about their rights is very, very helpful. So it's really about providing the space, providing the passion, and being there and present. And we really do recommend partnering with a legal services organization. That doesn't have to be the case. There are other communities where individual immigration attorneys help to provide and organize that. We know that's the case many of the time because the demand is so high for this. So Clinic has developed a model PowerPoint presentation on what a Know Your Rights presentation would look like. All of the materials that we have are downloadable in English and Spanish and many other languages. And we have a sort of train the trainer, if you will, on how to conduct a workshop. So there's lots of resources.
That Yiddish version is fascinating. Julia.
So I echo everything she said, and then I just want to add to that this can be an even broader opportunity. So this could be, I mean, we were talking earlier about the importance of humanizing these relationships, of building connections with people. So I think a really good idea would be to partner up with a church that has a lot of immigrants within it and jointly sponsor this workshop. And you could even have a potluck before it, music, a social activity, like something that'll just help you connect with people on a really human basis. And also make it feel much more mutual and less like, well, we're doing the social service for you, you're in need, but more like this is a joint activity and we're peers and we're engaging in this together, we share values, and we're building connections. And then it's also possible to have, if people are in different rooms doing different workshops, it's also possible to have one on active bystander training so that people who are most at risk are learning their rights, but then people who are allies who aren't at risk for deportation can be learning about how they can intervene in really important and appropriate ways. So I think making it a mutual event that has long-term connections.
It's a great idea. Ashley, you're going to add?
Yeah, I would just add, so my parish, we did this, and just some nuts and bolts as you think about organizing this. Great, all these topics are great, but think about time. So when we did it, we put together, worked with the legal service provider, but nobody really thinks about the number of people who perhaps come, want to listen, and want to talk privately afterwards and have questions, and maybe don't feel comfortable to share. So the idea of having people who, language availability, extra time for the space, and also really, I like the comment about different rooms, because really it is an idea of making this as welcoming as possible and kind of encouraging people to feel comfortable in this space. The other thing I would say, it's not really a DC specific thing, but we urge sometimes recording them. If you're in an underserved community, recording something that you could play again is a really good way if you don't have the resources to show something again and just give a general baseline. It's very helpful, I think. These are some nuts and bolts, and Clinic has some great material on that, but I think as you think about organizing it, remember, you can have a great schedule, but because these things, you never know who's going to come, and you never know how much, kind of personal, baggage, given what this event is. It's important to be very flexible with your schedule and remember to have lots of interpreters and space for private kind of sharing built in that time frame.
We have a great chapter in Washington, D.C. There's more than 1,000
chapter of
AILA, more than 1,000 immigration lawyers in this area. So my commit to you, if you're interested in putting that event together and you invest the kind of time into making that happen, I'll get you the immigration lawyers you need to do the presentation.
Take him up on us. Take him up on it.
And I will tell you, having spoken to people who are working in various parishes and other people in the Catholic churches here and others, there's a great worry amongst the clerics about what's happening to their people. And I think that, it may be that we provide, it's also should take the opportunity of being able to say to a parish, we'll take the responsibility of organizing this even in your space, because, it's often not easy for people to get, and if they know a space and are comfortable for this. So I think we have to, this is really about accommodating the needs and that creating this. So you can do everything you said, not only in your synagogue, but we can go to a church and do that. David, a question.
First of all, thank you all for coming. This has been fantastic. It's striking, not shocking, but striking the sheer volume of things that can be done. Do you have memory examples of the first thing that some congregations have done to get started on this journey?
So David asked the question just for the streaming, what in your memory have been the initial activities that have got congregations engaged in this process? Any comments?
Well, I would start, I'll speak to the refugee piece. So, we saw some state backlash starting in actually the 2016 after the Paris bombings, where you had communities that had been resettling refugees for years all of a sudden protest at some of the refugee resettlement sites. And one of the first things I think for some of these communities was taking the first step to just issue a statement of support for refugees and then hold an open house, kind of similar to what it sounds like was here, gathering like-minded people to kind of say we have to do something and kind of pooling the resources that was discussed about, well, we know that we need to give support. What's actually going to be helpful to this, to this group that needs it was a really first important step, I would say, in a couple communities who had particularly bad backlash. And I think one really important thing to remember is you're not going to come away with all the answers in the first session, but knowing that you now see faces of people who are interested and getting religious leaders there as well as community leaders, as well as a lot of times the service providers, is the most important first step, I think.
For my own church, we have been through a tremendous process. We had a new pastor, so this made change in our church. One of the very first things that sort of started this dialogue in my church was adult Bible school. We offer that during the summer, and I was asked to come speak because they wanted to start touching on the topic of immigrants in our communities. And it was a beautiful dialogue with members of our community who just wanted to get tuned into what are some of the issues that immigrants are facing. At Clinic, we were involved, Ashley was at Clinic at the time, in this tremendous project with the Visionaries project, and there are a couple flyers outside. There's a documentary that we've created that follows refugees in the organizations that resettle them and provide support. It's an amazing documentary, and it features our executive director, Jean Atkinson. It's a great tool to say, let's screen this documentary, right? And let's talk about it and have the internal conversation first and get to know what the issues are and get a temperature of the...
And I just wanted to clarify, Jill did not say the first step was to get a new pastor or rabbi.
No. But that was a catalyst for the...
Go ahead. Quickly, Julia.
Well, along the lines of movies, I think Harvest of Empire is
Right.
really worth screening. But I think I would recommend accompaniment, and there's a little bit of an investment in time because you have to sign up as someone who can do this and then go to the training and then be assigned someone to accompany. But what I would recommend to everybody is to go to these vigils, and I'll give you the link to register for May 18th and May 30th. And if you can be involved we have all these teams we need to help orchestrate those, but I would just jump in and do them because they're going to be incredible in terms of hearing the story of an undocumented person who lives in this area and has for many years, with children, what they're going through, going to the ICE office in Fairfax and trying to get a sense of how does this work, what's going on here,
So
listening to the faith
accompaniment
statements.
would be...
Accompaniment, and I would specifically recommend these vigils.
Super.
I mean, you've taken the first step, which is having conversations amongst yourselves about what do we believe and what do we stand for as a community. I mean, I tend to be more involved in the advocacy side of things, although we care deeply about making sure we help to resource the actual provision of services. I think being on the record matters, though, is a one of those first fundamental steps, to have the name of this congregation on sign-on letters, other interfaith actions where you're bringing faith communities together to say, yeah, this is not who we are as a nation, this is not who we are as a people, this is just wrong. I think that's, using your moral authority as a community to say, this is we're going to fight this and provide services on an individual level, but we want the rest of the world to know we think that what's happening is wrong.
Well, I want to thank each of you, not only for doing this, and one of our steps is that this is being captured on streaming, and we're very thankful to have that opportunity. So this can be digitally provided for other congregations who want this for educational purposes, and we'll pass that on to you. But we thank you more for your moral voices, for your commitment, and for your passion and for your expertise in giving us this evening and this opportunity. I'm not going to read the URJ document. I think you can read it for yourself. But I do want to tell you that Rabbi Shankman and I were asked to be on the phone with members of the Commission for Social Justice, and really as a catalyst to help move forward the idea of the URJ moving from discernment into full action. We all know the power that can be and the result of what it is when we embrace the immigrant community. And I want to remind us that, that there are over 100,000 refugees right now who are serving in our armed forces. We would not have things like Google. We would not have things like Bing. We would not have so many things. We wouldn't have God Bless America or A White Christmas. The immigrant ethos in this country is something that has been very part and parcel of the American culture. And these shores, I'm a first-generation American. If there wasn't an opening opportunity for my mother to come from Nazi Germany to these shores, I would not be sitting here. The imagination, and we know in generations before, the power of what happened when those kinder trains left and people had to leave their children. So we have an obligation, not only as Jews, but as part of one human family under the parenthood of God, to be part and parcel of trying to make sure that human beings have a safe and place to be. I want to thank you for your commitment. I really want to thank Kathy and Richard Newman, who worked, and Joan Greenbaum and our whole committee that's here. We have an active meeting that is open. If you're interested in working on this issue and of the settlement of a refugee family, please contact Joan or my office. We'd be happy to. Rabbi Shankman. We're all looking, and we've had an incredible response. Our board of directors has been very supportive, but they wanted to do this. We wanted to start with the idea of education. It's really important that we understand so that we're able to do things in a way that is helpful, and that we understand to do things that are going to be the type of effective advocacy. And I want to thank you and your communities and your organizations for what you've done, because this is an example and a great model for not only our congregation, but for many congregations. So we applaud you and thank you for this opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us, and good night. You guys were great.